Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to start now. Hi everyone, I'm Sophia from the Code for All team, and I want to welcome you to our Civitek Plus SDGs webinar series. This is a brand new project that we're doing at Code for All, and if you are familiar with who we are or what we do, you can find links in the YouTube description and the YouTube chat to read more about us. So I'm going to be speaking very briefly about who we are. So in short, Code for All is a global network composed of civic tech organizations from different parts of the world. And our mission is to connect these organizations so they can learn from each other and leading to greater impact in their local communities and in their projects. This new series is all about how civic tech and the UN Sustainable Development Goals are related. We've been trying to explore that gap and how civic tech can be used to address and help us come closer to reaching these goals. So for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about and who are wondering like what's civic tech, what are the UN Sustainable Development Goals, why am I here? There's a lot more to it, but I'm going to keep it like really quick and simple. Civic tech is technology that positively impacts society. It's about creating tools that help make more democratic, transparent, and people-centered public services. And the UN Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs for friends, are 17 goals put forth by the United Nations with the aim to together create peace and prosperity for the people and the planet. So if you wanna, this was like a super brief description because I don't want to take much time on this. But if you want to read more about civic tech or SDGs, there are links also in the YouTube description and the chat that you can go into more detail about. So whether you're new to civic tech or the SDGs, or you're a fan of both and are curious about how these two worlds collide, you've come to the right place. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope that you enjoyed the session. I'm going to just say a few housekeeping items before we get started. And during this session today, we'll start by hearing from each one of our speakers. Following this, we'll ask some questions to the panel, and then we'll finish with some Q&A from the audience. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat window on YouTube, and we're going to be addressing them during the Q&A. And a recorded version of this webinar will be available at codeforall.org and on our YouTube channel for future watching. So if you didn't have a chance to take a look at it today and you want to see it again, please go to our YouTube channel or our website. And okay, so having said this, I want to start by presenting our amazing speakers. We're going to be talking in the order that I'm going to be presenting. So I would like to first introduce to Alma Rangel, Executive Director at Codeando, México. I also want to introduce Neves Adieno, Director of Programs, Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. Khairil Yusof, Coordinator and Co-founder of Sinar project. Sheba, Najmi, Founder and Executive Director at Good for Pakistan. And sadly, we're not going to be joined by Mariana Neves today. She had a personal situation. She is governance statistics specialist at UNDP Oslo Governance Center. And we hope she can take part of one of our future sessions. So stay tuned for that one. And I want to thank you all for joining us today. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your insights and knowledge with us. And I want to start by passing the microphone to Alma so we can start with this session. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alma.
Awesome. Thanks, Sophia. First, well, for everyone, good morning. I'm in Mexico, so for me it's morning, not the same for every speaker in this call. So as Sophia stated, I'm the executive director at an NGO that's called Codeando, Mexico. And I would like to first introduce a bit of what we do so that we can understand why I'm here and we can start speaking about the relationship between Civitek and SDGs, right? So Codeando, Mexico is an organization that has been around for 9 years in Mexico, and that works with people and teams working in the public space. That can be either public institutions, civil society organizations, collective social movements, and we help them improve and deepen and broaden their impact through tech and data, civic tech and data. So one particular thing that makes us different is that we are community-based. That means that everything we do is open, everything we do is collaborative. There's not a single project that comes out just in the name of Codeando as an organization. We always have partners that are really aware of whatever public problem we're trying to address. And we try to be iterative because we know that it's better done than perfect, and we need to start somewhere, right? So if you want to know about us, you can check us out in our website. This brief promotion here. So to start off this conversation, and I would love to hear what Khairil and Neves and Sheba has to say about it, I wanted to take up these first 5 minutes to kind of talk about the relationship within the Sustainable Development Goals and civic tech, right? So the Sustainable Development Goals, as Sophia stated, are basically a shared blueprint. So we're all agreeing that there are certain problems we need to address globally, and that require both local and national and international strategies, right? And as such, I think, particularly in the past 5 years, because we are in a new edition of the SDGs since 2015, technology plays a very big part as a means of implementation. So technology has a bunch of promises: efficiency, reduction of costs, accelerating global decarbonization, for example, and how to broaden and deepen impact. We are also aware that technology has several risks and several things we have to consider, because not everyone in the world has the same digital literacy or the same access to technology. So that's also something we have to consider. But I think I would like to kind of point out how civic tech differs from technology in the sense of what we can bring to Sustainable Development Goals. So civic technology, although it also is part of this big technology spectrum, it has different characteristics. So it centers around community, it centers around how we can improve life for citizens and how we can improve communication between public institutions and citizens. So it is at its core collaborative. And I think this is a particular thing that brings a lot to the table when we talk about Sustainable Development Goals. Since we're talking about very big problems, we're also talking about a lot of stakeholders and a lot of communities' interests and a lot of ideas and potential solutions that can be involved in working towards achieving these goals. So I think in particular, civic tech has the potential to bring these different actors to the table, to be a means of implementation, to build consensus and build community, and build effective collective and democratic action towards the Sustainable Development Goals that kind of serve as a framework or of where we should be putting our efforts, right? So another thing I think we have to consider with civic tech is that it's very aware that it's only a means of implementation and it's only a tool, and that it has to work with offline processes. It has to work in ways that we identify how to redistribute power and how to redistribute decision-making and how to build shared infrastructure and shared common knowledge. And in a context such as, in particular, Mexico, it is also a matter of building trust and building accountability and building transparency. So I wanted to start my participation with these ideas on the table, so I can also hear from the other speakers. And this is where I'm going to leave my first participation.
Thank you so much, Alma. I'm going to pass it over to Neves.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Nice to meet you all. Such a pleasure to be here. I work for the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, which is a global network that brings together multilateral agencies, private sector partners, social impact organizations, research and academic institutions civil society, name it, anybody whose primary concern is how we can harness data to support the planning, implementation, and tracking of progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. This particular session, and why I think this is important, is because more often than not, when you talk about tech, especially in the civic sector, people tend to isolate tech, and the processes. And as you've heard from Alma, you cannot separate those two. And so I'd just like to pick up the point that she's actually making, because tech is an enabler, tech is an accelerator, tech is a facilitator. It is a means to an end, rather than being an end in itself. And so when we look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 SDGs, they pretty much cover a broad spectrum of different thematic sectors. Name it, and most organizations, either directly or indirectly, work on the SDGs. And whether they're familiar with the SDGs or not, they're already working on something that's actually related to the SDGs. So it's a very comprehensive framework. It is an important global commitment, and a rallying call for all of us to do something towards very specific measurable targets and indicators. And so when I look at the opportunity, especially for civic tech, it's more or less in the innovation, innovation within sectors, the opportunity to leverage data, the opportunity to leverage technology, and innovation to leapfrog in the specific sectors where the different partners are actually working in. There are many different ways to do this, but maybe I'll just mention 2 or 3. We have to use tech and innovation to strengthen existing foundational systems for production, management, sharing, and use of data. That is very, very important. In other words, tech can be an enabler in strengthening existing processes and systems or improving them. We can also use tech to harness new complementary sources of data, and we've seen innovation in different areas, be it health, be it agriculture. We've seen young innovators coming up with apps. We see different instruments for collecting data, to measure social impact. We're also seeing governments coming in to look at, how e-governance and technology can also, accelerate service delivery, and that is very important. Lastly, I can say there is an opportunity to break down the barriers between the civic sectors and the public sector, because often governments are lagging behind. Private sector is way ahead of everybody, and then you have social impact organizations or civil society who sit somewhere in between. And so there is an opportunity to use civic tech to actually bring down those barriers and connect these partners in a way that then promotes partnerships, collaboration, that can then leapfrog the SDGs by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you, Neves. I'm going to pass it over to Khairil.
Hi, I'm thankful I'm not the last, because I think with the previous 2 speakers, I don't have any words left to talk about SDGs. But I mean, we hear these common things, right? SDG covers every single aspect of development, right? Whether it's environment, whether it's inequality, climate change, anti-corruption, and whatnot. So yeah, I agree with what Davis was saying, that basically we're all working in it somehow. And I also agree with Alma in the sense that, we're enablers. So for us at Sinar project, we see, because all these problems are huge, we see civic tech as, one of these tools or enablers that can help, in some way to solve some of these problems. Whether it's to provide, better access for people that need the data to do their work, whether it's better tools to enable it, or it could be better transparency in terms of holding governments accountable to whether they're actually achieving or moving towards these goals or not. Specifically for Sinar project, what we found out is that the angle that we fit into SDGs is actually SDG 16, which is on, let me just check that. I can't remember every SDG, but yeah, I'll show later on, like, how it makes sense, right? But it's basically SDG 16 is about peaceful and inclusive societies, and then accountable and inclusive institutions. And I think in the, so for us, it works about, how people can have more closer access to decision makers, whether they're in government or even in society. And we also, holding governments accountable in terms of whether what their goals are and what their policies are is actually towards, can we measure and capture these things? And what I like best of all about SDG 16, especially in terms of the Code for All network, is the fact that it includes a part of the goal is global participation. And it is part of SDG 16 is that we should broaden the participation of developing countries in the institutions of global governance. So who sets their standards for, let's say, climate change, or who sets their standards for transparency, or who starts, who defines, kind of the goals, standards, and so on for, let's say, anti-corruption or beneficial ownership. So I think this is the part that Civitek and the Code for All network can help, especially for those of us in the global south or from the developing countries, that our work in some small part, will help towards us being, equal participants in this development of, institutions of global governance. So yeah, that's my take.
Thank you, Khairil. Sheba?
Yes, thank you so much, Sophia, for having me. It's great to be here. I'll start with a little introduction. And Sophia mentioned my name is Sheba Najmi. I've been a user experience design practitioner in the technology sector for 19 years. And at the same time, I've been in this nonprofit civic technology world for the last 10 years, first as a Code for America fellow, which that was in 2012. And if you haven't heard of Code for America, they had a year-long public service fellowship program, which they call the Peace Corps for Geeks, that paired technologists with government to address citizens' needs. And then from there, as the founder of Code for Pakistan, which I founded in 2013. And, whenever I'm asked that those two sound like two different things, like user experience design and mainstream technology, and then the civic technology world, but actually that blend makes perfect sense to me, because as technologists, we're all humanists first, right? Because the problems that we're solving are actually about human beings. They're not about technology. And so particularly the human-centered and community-driven approaches and processes that we take to design apply just as much to civic tech and to the SDGs and pretty much any other domain you can think of where there are people and their needs need to be addressed. So let me tell you a little bit about Code for Pakistan as well. 9 years ago, Code for Pakistan, when it started, it introduced the notion of citizen-driven civic technology to Pakistan. And we do a number of things, including our civic innovation labs, which are community groups in different cities that engage both the community and the government. There's a civic fellowship program with the National Institute of Health in Islamabad and a women's civic internship program in the Northwest province of KP, where there are much fewer opportunities for women. And our flagship program is our Civic Innovation Fellowship program, also in that province in Peshawar, in partnership with the KP government and the World Bank. There are 20 full-time fellows who partner with government departments for 6 months, and we guide them to follow this very human-centered design process to create civic solutions. So far, there have been 135 fellows over the last 8 years across these various fellowship programs that have partnered with different government departments, more than 35 government departments, with the departments of health and education and water and sanitation and food and energy and police and justice, among others, which are all SDGs, by the way, right? And so ultimately it all boils down to, I think, the way we go about addressing the needs of end users, similar to what Alma was saying, where the key aspect, to addressing civic needs, as to any other needs, really, is to lead with people, not problems. So that's about doing needs finding research with people at the outset to define the right problems to focus on, and then prototyping low-cost solutions and testing them with the end users, again, the people that will be using them, actually including them in the process of that whole creation in a participatory way as well, and then modifying these potential solutions based on those learnings. So I think even though we call it civic technology, it's only in part about the tools that will help make more people-centered public services. I've always believed that the biggest part of it is actually about the process through which these tools are created. And one important element of the process, for example, is that the people who will be using the tool must be involved in its creation. And so it may actually well turn out that sometimes the solution isn't technological at all. For example, if we are working with women who live in a rural village and they don't have phones, then it wouldn't make sense to have a phone-based solution. And the solution may be a human being going door to door with information, right? So it's about meeting people's needs where they are and whatever the process leads us to. So keeping that lens in mind, you know, all of the SDGs fall squarely within the realm of civic tech, which I view, again, as this primarily sort of citizen-focused approach to solving problems that is highly open and collaborative and inclusive. And later in this meeting, I'll share more about, you know, some specific activities that Code for Pakistan has undertaken specifically to address the SDGs, but I'll leave it at that for now. Yeah.
Thank you, Sheba. And before I move forward with the questions that we have from me as a moderator, I just wanted to also highlight some important things that we all share and that you all share. It was things around collaboration being a key and the processes being the more important part rather than the technology itself. And that's something I just want to highlight because it's something that we're constantly talking in the civic tech ecosystem and constantly talking in this kind of conversations. And it's important to keep it in mind that it's not all about the tech itself and the tool itself. It's about the process and the people. Thank you so much. So I'm going to start with some questions. These are open questions. So the one who wants to take it and answer it, you can just unmute yourself and go ahead. The first one would be, how can we easily explain the relationship between Civitek and technology and the SDGs? If you could use one phrase to say it, because we've shared a lot of information right now in your presentation, but if you use one word or one sentence to say, okay, this is how they connect, what would the word be? Tricky question. I always like to do tricky questions, to be honest.
Yeah, I would go for leapfrog.
Interesting.
Yeah. So civic tech is going to help us to leapfrog the SDGs.
Mm-hmm.
If it's one word for me, it would be data. So because we, in order to measure all the different SDGs, we're going to need to have access to data, you know, involving all the different stakeholders, and to make sense of all that data to see whether, you know, we're actually moving in the right direction for the SDGs.
I would go with something more like collaborative or people, as Shia said, because I think it's more about that, right? Like, I think traditional technology could help us with data, for example, but Civitek in particular helps us with the process and the trust and building community. So I would go a little bit more to that direction.
There were two words that were coming in mind for me. One is aligned and the other is an enabler, because, you know, as Sophia, as you mentioned, civic tech is technology that positively impacts society, which is also what the SDGs are trying to do. The SDGs focus on ending poverty and hunger and improving health and education and access to clean water and sanitation and, you know, reducing inequality and tackling climate change and all of that. And so that to me is also what civic technology is trying to do as well. And the process can enable the achievement of the SDGs.
Definitely. Thank you. So I'm gonna take the collaboration part, and especially something that Neves was mentioning about the gap and the difference between the private sector and the private and social one. So how can collaboration across multi-stakeholders group design a way forward to accelerate process towards the SDGs? How do you see this collaboration happening, especially with taking into consideration this gap that we've mentioned before, and how, I see it, for example, like in Mexico, and how the government and certain institutions are way behind this innovation process and the understanding of solutions to not be focused on the technologies, etc., on the tools, etc. So how can you see this collaboration helping us moving forward to achieve the SDGs?
Jump in, which I think, I mean, collaboration is really key. And I love that Alma, you chose that word, because collaboration across, between so many different groups, between the creators of solutions and the users of solutions, between government and citizens, amongst civil society organizations, all working towards, similar goals. And even to Khairil's point about data, like, there are different pieces of data that different organizations have purview over. And when you bring those together, it really unlocks a bigger picture, right? And so, for example, for us, as many of us are in the civic tech sort of practitioners, we have access to a way of thinking and technical skills and design thinking approaches, et cetera, that are not generally present in government, right? And so those public-private partnerships are really key. Even as an example, to build physical infrastructure required to deliver internet service in hard to reach areas and to currently disadvantaged populations, the government has to partner with private organizations that can enable that. And then on the other side, we need technologists working with government to show what's possible. So whether we're researchers or designers or community organizers or writers, as citizens, we're not just passive consumers. We can participate in making government work. We all have unique skill sets, right? And it's going to take all of us bringing all of our skills to the table to make collective progress towards achieving those SDGs.
Yeah, I like what Sheba just said resonates a lot with me. I think we're at a point, and I think Neves said so, or something like this at the beginning, where the problems we're trying to tackle cannot be tackled one-sided. Like, even with all the resources in the world, like governments alone cannot do it, citizens alone cannot do it, NGOs alone cannot do it. So we really need to start building community and collaboration through the processes. And I think another important thing in this Civitek space and us bringing the tools to the table is also bringing them to the table with the openness to know that we don't know everything, and that even our concept of development may be challenged, right? Like other people, other communities may have different concepts of development and may have different ideas on where we need to focus, and that's also valid. So to tackle these big problems at an international scale, we also need to understand and find solutions that fit at a local level, and understand that not all solutions are going to be necessarily reusable or replaceable, and that's also okay. But I think it's more a matter of how we build processes that redistribute power and give communities agency and help us find common solutions, than just like identifying a solution and bringing it everywhere as fast as we can.
No, absolutely. And maybe just to jump in to add on to all those great points that have been made, I would say, tech needs people and people need tech. So there is an interdependence there that is absolutely important. Now, when you look at the tech side, there are different components of that. You have the infrastructure side of things, You have the software, you have the hardware, you have the algorithms and other tools that enable people to actually leverage the tech. Then you have people. People are at different levels. You have the politicians who don't want anything to do with the tech. What they need is information, whether good or bad, to make the decision. And they ultimately will make a decision whether you have the tech or the data or the information or not. And so it's important to understand those dynamics, because the power plays at different levels when it comes to people are quite important. So you have the politicians, you have the executive, then you have the more technical people who actually leverage tech and provide insights that then can be used. And then you need partnerships now. Tech does not exist in isolation, neither do people. So you need an enabling environment, and partnerships can only thrive in an enabled environment. And to do that, you have to understand people's interests. What is it that they're actually looking for? What are the incentives? What is it that they're bringing to the table? What actually matters to them? Ultimately, what do they want to achieve? So that you can leverage that, and then infuse the element of partnerships, the tech and the people coming together to provide innovative solutions that then ultimately accelerate impact or have an impact on the lives of people. In the absence of all these different components coming together, then you constantly miss something. And partnerships underpin all this. Capacity building underpins all this. Connections, peer-to-peer exchanges, connecting people to learn, from each other and create incentives. At the political level, a president wants to hear from another president. A minister wants to hear from another minister. A civil society organization wants to hear from another civil society organization, and the same for private sector. And so we have to create these opportunities for all these different partners, to sit on a platform where they can actually share and listen in a language that actually resonates and actually matters to them. And partnership and collaboration is absolutely key to all that. Thank you.
Thank you, Neves. Khairil, I don't know if you want to jump in, or I can go with a next question.
Yeah, just go ahead with the next question. Yeah.
Perfect. So we're going to start with our Q&A from the audience. And we have a first question, which is very good one, I have to say. I'm going to put it in the chat too. So you can all, the panelists, you can see it, but I'm going to read it also out loud. Just give me one moment. So talking about the set standards, Khairil, you were mentioning about the standards for SDGs and data. How can we make sure we are gathering the same information and that it's being used in a standardized way? And that's something that we have encountered in Civitek and in open data ecosystem, the part of, okay, standardized data. How do we make sure that we're gathering the same thing or that the data is standardized? And also, are those standards discriminative toward the reality of the countries in the global south? That's a question from the audience.
Yeah, so this is actually, what everybody, the others have raised, which is about the process, right? So when we're developing these standards, right, when we work with our communities, we start understanding the gaps, right? So for example, if it's internet access, there are, we have to look, for example, at the gender dimension. So if there's one mobile per household, right? Does that mean that every household has a mobile? Who has it? Who actually has it? Is it the person who has the power to access the mobile phone? How is it used for? And so on, like all these kind of little dynamics has to be captured. Is it affordable? And then, and is what you have, for example, with like say with the mobile phone, and is it affordable? And are the services that you can access it actually make a difference in your lives? So I think this is the kind of little gaps in terms of data that we in Civitek, because we because we work with the communities and we understand, the implications of how it's being used and the gaps, we can actually help improve some of the data standards that we're seeing globally, and then, fill in our gaps, right? So quite often, some of these, we could be involved in the process of improving them. Are they inclusive? Is the collection of them harmful? So I think for us in Civitek, or even for us working with data and understanding these things and working with the community, I think we play a quite important role in improving these standards in terms of measurement and providing our technical inputs, especially in terms of the global south and the communities that we work with. Yeah.
Thank you, Khairil. Neves, you want to share something with us? I'm sorry, Alma. I'm gonna pass it over to Neves first, and then I can go with you.
Thanks, Sophia, and I totally agree with the Yusof, because some of the issues he's mentioning, especially at the local level, these inequalities have always been there, and during the MDGs or the Millennium Development Goals, it was a big challenge. So the SDGs as a framework itself is comprehensive enough and brings in all the different components that you actually require, especially for standardization of data. When you look at especially at the indicator level for the SDGs, you have the different tiers. For example, tier 1 of the SDG indicators, those are conceptually clear, they're internationally established methodology, and the standards are available. For a high-income country, low-income country, middle-income country, and the data is regularly produced historically, and it's well understood. Tier 2, you have indicators that are conceptually clear, internationally established methodology, standards are available, but the data is not regularly produced. Whether it's a high-income country, low, middle-income country, whichever way. And then tier 3 is no internationally established methodology, and standards are yet available. So when you look at the SDGs themselves as a framework, especially at the data level, all this is being, is actually incorporated. Of course, the practical, aspects of doing this and delivering the data in a way that's actually, comparable across the globe is something that many different actors are working on, including ourselves, through different initiatives. And then lastly, I'll just say the description of the data itself, especially when you talk about metadata. So where is the data being produced? How is it being produced? Who is it being produced for? Could be an important component of finding, standards, and of course defining that in a way that could be universally acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. Alma?
I would also say that standardizing data, particularly in Civitek, is a twofold problem, right? So first is a technical problem, and I think Khairil and Neves have talked about that and the resources available to do it. And then it's a human problem because we also have to we have to arrive to the same concepts and to the same understanding of what those concepts mean and how to map them in data. So I think one of the things, I know we talk a lot about data, but we also have to consider that this is a pretty young ecosystem and industry. So we're still learning a lot, right? So we've been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years. So we're still learning a lot. And I think in terms of standards, because we have worked with standards in Mexico, for example, what really helps us is when standards are flexible enough to kind of be able to work with them and be able to mature them. Because maybe complying with a standard from 0 to 100 is really hard. But when we actually make them flexible and we think about collecting data in terms of also maturing the ecosystem and maturing the processes of collecting them and analyzing and keeping them flexible enough to kind of be able to change and adapt them to different local contexts, I think that's really helpful.
Thank you. Sheba, do you want to jump in or should I move with the next question? Next question.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I have another question. This one is particularly focused and addressed to Sheba. So this is for you. It's because you didn't say anything, so this one's for you. In Pakistan perspective, Which SDGs can we best address through Civitek?
Yeah, it's a great question. And interestingly, at Code for Pakistan, we've actually been running an annual civic hackathon since 2013, and sometimes more than one a year. But specifically from 2017 to 2020, for 4 years, our annual civic hackathon was an SDG hackathon. That's what it was called, and that's what the goals were. And so, for example, in 2020, there were 700 people. Because of COVID, it was an online hackathon, and so there were 700 people who registered from 90 different cities. And the focus SDG areas were education, environmental sustainability, financial inclusion, food security, health, public safety and security. And they rotate between years. For example, in 2019, they were SDG 3, which was good health and well-being, SDG 4, which was quality education, 5, which was gender equality, and then 9, which was industry, innovation, and infrastructure, and 11, which was sustainable cities and communities. So, and again, in other years, they were different. So there's a lot of SDGs that are applicable to Civitek and in the context of Pakistan in particular. The way we approached it was we collected problem statements from civil society organizations and government departments and the citizen participants before the events in the focus categories. And I can share some examples of those problem statements of, the kind of thing that we saw. For example, anything ranging from air quality, from especially in the smog season, which runs from October to February, there's in one of the provinces in Punjab, there's sort of this uncontrolled emissions and crop burning and very poor fuel quality, and that worsens the quality of the already sort of unhealthy air there. At 300 and above, the air is considered hazardous. So what kinds of technological tools can be used to predict and control smog levels for each year, for better management and data-driven decision-making? Or on environment conservation, there were things we addressed that were around, or that the participants addressed that were around, how can COVID-related environmental stressors be anticipated and mitigated? Or in food security, like how can technology play a part in ensuring the gap between food availability? Because in Pakistan, there is actually a surplus of food production, and there is also a huge deficit, a large vulnerable population to whom it's not getting to, right? So how do you ensure the gap between food availability and access for those who don't have it, that is filled? And some of the kinds of ideas that people prototyped were interesting to see. They were around, for example, reducing waste by collecting waste cooking oil from restaurants and hotels and households and converting it into biodiesel, aided in tracking and communication via mobile application, but others around mental health awareness and resources. So, this has actually been a flagship activity for our team the last 7 years, connecting the dots, specifically with the SDGs. The kind of the vast spectrum of SDGs that we can cover in Pakistan, I think it's pretty much all of them. Actually, yes, it's every single one that I can think of. So, yeah.
Thank you, Sheba. We have another question from Robert. Says, I'm from the nonprofit Citizens Foundation, Civitek developer. Welcome. With more and more GovTech companies providing Civitek solutions, how does community-oriented, bottom-up Civitek compete? Tricky question. I like tricky questions.
That's particularly interesting to me because one of the things we actually want and work for is people who professionalize in certain aspects of Civitek, right? For example, we have a very big country and we cannot cover every single aspect of Civitek. So for us, having certain companies that professionalize in certain areas is actually very useful, particularly because they tend to work more around digitalization of public services or like very specific things. And then we can focus on just in general, capacity building, changing mindset, and the particular projects that public institutions or civil society has that address or build from a community perspective. And so, yeah, I think there are so many SDGs and so many problems that it's, I mean, there's enough work for everyone.
Thank you, Alma. I don't know if there's another panelist who wants to talk, or I can move forward to the last question before we finish this conversation. Okay, I'm gonna move to the next one. Can you quickly explain one specific project from your organization that is related to the SDGs, and how can local international folks can be involved? Well, she already mentioned the hackathon, but yeah, I don't know if there's another one that you want to share with the audience.
Sure. When we think about sort of environment and pollution, and I'll give another example on that front. So this actually is not from the hackathon, but this is one of the projects that our fellows in our Government Innovation Fellowship Program worked on. So in the KP province, which is that Northwest province that I was talking about, there are 250,000 registered vehicles that are being managed by only 3,000 traffic wardens. And so the residents of Peshawar, of that city, are constantly dealing with traffic jams and violations. And I mean, basically a distance of 10 minutes will easily take, 30 to 40 minutes to traverse because of traffic jams. So when our fellowship team first talked to the KP traffic department, the department was inundated with hundreds of daily requests to verify licenses and traffic violation tickets. And so the department was spending more time just responding to these verification requests from people than actually providing services like creating and renewing driving licenses, and they were absolutely drowning. So our fellows followed this very sort of user-centered design process where they conducted user research, and they learned, and they did surveys and those sorts of things, and they learned that most Peshawar citizens want a smartphone-based solution to be able to navigate, track the status of their traffic violations, to be able to file complaints against traffic wardens, because corruption is a big part of it too, right? Like bribery and sort of stopping people to whether or not it's warranted and those sorts of things. And so they learned also from the government side by doing user research with everyone from the traffic wardens to the people doing data entry, all the way to the head of the department, and created solutions that would, both on the government side, help be able to track where the traffic jams were, where there were accidents happening, so that they could install U-turns and those kinds of things, make decisions based on the data in real time, and also on the citizen side, be able to navigate a lot of those sort of violations and get their processes done. And since its launch in 2018, it has helped the traffic department respond to 4 million queries, and it has saved the government nearly 20,000 work hours just in the last 2 years. And on the citizen front as well, it has helped resolve a lot of queries and make things a lot smoother on that front too. So, whether or not it's moving the needle on air pollution in a big way, like these are all little collaborative efforts, I think, that are showing what's possible. They're helping in little ways move the needle, and certainly are laddering up, trying to help towards some of those SDGs. And so I think when you see a lot of these local interventions and a lot of these local solutions, then that kind of impact builds upon itself. And when you stitch together the impact of all of these interventions that we're doing, hopefully, you'll see larger and larger scale impact.
Thank you, Sheba. I'm going to pass it over to Neves.
Thanks, Sophia. And I just wanted to highlight one project, global project that we are currently undertaking. as the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, together with our technical advisory group, and it's called the Data Values Project. It is both a policy consultation, but also an advocacy campaign, which aims to unlock the value of data for all. And as a global community, we are working to tackle how governments, businesses, and civil society are actually using data. We have 3 tracks where there's collaboration happening simultaneously. But the idea behind those tracks is to really develop common positions, policies on issues such as data ethics, rights, and governance issues. Because more often we talk about the tech, but we know tech can be used for good or for bad. We are seeing globally, less tolerance for citizens and civil society. So the civic space is actually closing and getting tighter, both in the global north, global south, high income countries, low income countries. This is happening across the board. And so for the 3 tracks, we are looking at how data can be, for example, a route to inclusion and equity. How do we get to hear from unheard voices on what genuine inclusion looks like across the data value chain, and how we can make this a standard practice. The second track is how data is well governed, surfacing different perspectives and defining the building blocks for a shared vision around, good data governance. And then the third one and the last one is how data, can empower and really power sustainable and equitable development. So the idea here is to really identify barriers and enablers for driving inclusive and sustainable engagement around data use, but for public good, because it can also be used for public harm. Thank you.
Thank you, Neves. Khairil, I don't know if you want to share a project.
So for me, in terms of the global community for Civitek, for me, I would say support the Civitek organizations that are doing parliamentary monitoring or legislative monitoring. And the reason that I mentioned this one is because this is one of the few mechanisms in which it's inclusive, where citizens and civil society can actually hold government and executive accountable. So through your elected representatives, you can get them to ask the questions that matter to you. And those people hold the governments accountable, the executive accountable to answer those questions that are demanded by citizens. And then in order to answer these questions by the executive, they in turn have to work with the public service to get the data and the information to reply and to reply to these questions and to provide either the data or the policies and so on whether the policy demands and the data and information by citizens are actually accountable or not. So just an example of how a parliament can help, for example. So one of the indicators for SDGs is statistics on sexual abuse of children. So in some countries, like for example, in Malaysia, this data is actually suppressed. And one of the few places that we can actually get this data is actually to ask them in parliament and actually make the government answer them. And I've seen this throughout a lot of different parliamentary monitoring organizations. Quite often the data that are really hard to get, the questions on the policies on why government is or not doing something about an issue that concerns citizens are often found in parliament. And quite often the data that we make accessible is often the simplest way or most accessible way, if you can make them digitally accessible for normal citizens behind all these complex processes of government. So yeah, so I would say like for Civitek, in terms of closing the feedback loop for this, access to decision makers, I would say support the global initiatives around Civitek and parliamentary organizations that are trying to make all this kind of decisions and data in government, in parliaments and legislative more accessible. Yeah.
Thank you, Khairil. And yeah, for the audience, I would just only sum up with take a look at what's been done in your community, in your country. Take a look at what organizations, whether they're Civitek or not, what organizations are working towards the SDGs in different areas, and try to support them. that would be one of the things that we're always trying to promote in our sessions too, like check on your community and what's being done in your community. And I wanna close with this. I want to thank you so much. Thank you, Alma, Neves, Khairil, and Sheba. Thank you so much for joining us today and for always being part of our sessions and being like super interested. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the session. I hope you stay tuned for the rest of the sessions. We're going to be putting some things and some information that it was shared today in the description of the YouTube channel. So you can also take a look at there and the different projects that we mentioned today and that we talked about. And a few things that I want to tell you before we all sign off is, if you like what you saw and you're interested in joining the Code for All community, you can join our Slack space. The link is going to be in the YouTube description. And to receive updates about what we're doing, if you're interested about, okay, what our members are doing in the local communities, what projects can I support, how can I volunteer to a particular member, you can sign up to our bi-monthly newsletter. Also, you're going to find the link in our YouTube description. And that would be all on my side. Thank you very much. And thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the session.
Yeah. Thank you
Thank
for having us. Yeah. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everyone.